we probably technically are live at this point, but it always feels like it takes a minute for it to actually pull everything up.
I'm pulling it up. Is there questions or something?
There will be,
Okay.
and we are there. We
What's
are
your YouTube
there.
link again? I forget.
I will send it to you,
Oh,
and I'm gonna make that sharing so we can hop on Facebook as well.
You're just putting it in the chat here, or?
Yeah. Ooh, well, I can, yeah. Dang it. All the people who are watching right now are like, good God.
But
this happens,
amateurs.
right? This is like an every time thing. I think at some point I probably will be good enough at Zoom that like I can have everything all set up and I have to do nothing and it's super smooth, but today is not that day.
That's fine. Not my day either. Let's see.
It'd be I. Here we go. And I have to do nothing and it's woohoo.
There we go.
All right, cool beans. I am going to hit the record button just in case your interwebs die on us.
Yeah, it shouldn't. I had someone look at it last night, so it should be better. Hopefully.
Okay, so
but it
fingers crossed.
definitely cut out on a previous recording that I did with someone else. So I was like, oh man.
It's life. It's life.
Yeah.
The state of the world right now is like a huge awe man. Like that's just what it is.
Isn't that the truth?
That's what it'd be. All right, cool. I don't know why I feel the need to clap, but this is like how I get ready for things. Like now we're ready. Welcome to the Social Hour. My name is Nicole. I'm a photographer, digital artist, and writer. And today I am here with the indomitable, amazing fantasy goddess, Renee Robyn. Her work has been featured just about everywhere there is to feature photography, and companies like Wacom and Tether Tools and Adobe and Phase One. She has tutorials out with platforms like ProEDU, has been on magazine covers and book covers, basically just about anything that you can do as a photographer, Renee has pretty much done. So suffice it to say, as a fantasy nerd, I am super duper excited that she's here. Thank you for coming, Renee.
Thanks for having me. I'm always excited to do something like this.
Yeah, it's the
especially with you.
Yay! Winning. Fantasy nerds have to unite.
Exactly.
We already have a bunch of people showing up in our comment section. Chris, Olga Tinyanin, Molly, Reality Reimagined, Dennis, Sarah J, Grace Almera is here. So
I love Grace's work. She's so good.
I know, she's so fantastic. So yeah, we're just getting loads and loads of awesome people. Ella just showed up as well. Becca is here. Craig is here. So everybody, if you have questions for Renee, put them in the comments and we'll try to get to them as we have a chance.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Craig asks you say hi to Sir Curtis.
Oh, Sir Curtis. Craig says hello. He waved back.
Oh, see, Craig, you got to wave. That's so nice. I want to wave from Curtis.
Oh, he just waved to you too, Nicole.
Okay.
He did the double.
Ooh, 2 hands.
Jazz hands.
Yeah, I'm excited now. All right. So before, of course, I mean, it's the not so invisible elephant in the room, but how are you holding up during all of this isolation?
I feel kind of bad saying it, but fine. Surprisingly, I thought I would struggle because I'm so social. I'm so extroverted, right? Like there's the extrovert scale, and I'm not like all the way over, but I'm pretty far over.
Right.
You know, like if I can fill my day with socializing like 75% of it, I'm good, you know.
Yeah.
So I figured I was really gonna struggle, but turns out that doing like 12 years of digital art trains you for a lot of isolation.
Yes,
like,
you do.
Yeah, exactly. It was kind of funny because it was just like, oh yeah, well, I mean, I just sit in front of the computer and work like I normally do.
Yeah, like, oh, it's so terrible, but it's really pretty much like every day of my life. So
yeah, pretty much. Yeah. You know, I'm sure the batteries are they're starting to run a little bit low where I'm just like, okay, it would be nice to see some people.
Yeah.
That would be cool. But at the same time, like I'm like adaptable and I'll figure it out. So, I mean,
yeah,
it just is what it is at this point. Like I realized, I acknowledged early on that like I can't control any of it, so I just kind of let it all go.
Yeah,
I was like,
I think that's really the best way to deal with it, because if you feel like you can make changes that you can't make, it makes you freaking crazy.
Oh, it's so much worse. It's so much worse. Yeah. It's really frustrating. So
Totally. Yeah.
yeah. I don't know. How about yourself? How are you taking it?
As well as can be expected. I mean, I'm lucky that my family is healthy and my husband's able to work from home as well. So we've basically
Nice.
been almost 100% quarantined, aside from like we order our groceries in. If we happen to order takeout, they just leave things on the doorstep and then I wait a minute and go out there and pick them up off the ground. So like we really have been, aside from the fact that, you know, I live in a suburban hell and my neighbors can see into my backyard. So we could be like, hi, you know, that's about as much as we've gotten. Or like
Yeah.
taking the dogs for a walk and trying to like go way over to the side and let people pass. That's about as much human contact as I've had. So
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
yeah.
Yeah,
But I mean,
yeah. I am super excited that storm season is starting here. I haven't been home for a storm season in a few years, and it's my favorite season in Alberta.
yeah. Because this
We get
is usually your time of the year to travel, right?
well, I mean, all year round is the time of year for travel,
Yeah.
typically. But you know, the last like 2 years, anyways, I've been in Newfoundland for the iceberg season this
Oh,
time of year,
right.
right? Which is amazing. I love iceberg season. But this year, right now, the province is shut down to people who don't live there, so I
Right.
can't get into the province at the moment. So I was like, all right, well, like let's readjust, and we're just gonna go. I'm gonna go chase storms.
Yeah. Shoot. I
So,
would too. Having those, the clouds, the skies, the amazing just skyscapes, like, oh, they're so good.
yeah, I do love that about this province. There's a lot of things that I really, really don't like about this province, but the skies are amazing, especially in summer. So,
So what is it like that draws you to traveling so much?
well, I mean, just when I was young, we never really traveled much. You
Mhm.
know, like we traveled through the province of Alberta a lot and like a couple times to Saskatchewan and to BC, but you know, I was just constantly reading about like, well, I mean, I just love fantasy and all this stuff, and I wanted to see what was out there that wasn't like the great flatlands of Alberta.
Right.
And there's so much. So it was just like this like I need to get this into my system. I need to experience this. I need to see it with my own eyes, these things that I've been reading about. So yeah.
Yeah. So I know your mom is an author. Is that where your love of reading came from?
No. So she's only started she basically started a new career in
Oh,
her
okay.
60s. So she
Good
retired.
for her.
Yeah, she retired early and was just like, you know, I'm tired of doing what I'm doing. I've done it for a long time. You know, she worked for the government and she was just like, nah, I'm out. I've had it. So she just started writing. But my whole family on both sides, especially my dad's side, I mean, my mom is addicted to books. Her house is literally a library. All the walls, floor to ceiling, are books. And
Yep.
my dad loves to read and my dad loves to write. And you know, my grandparents were amazing storytellers. And you know, and they would fill our heads with, my one grandfather would fill our heads with stories of like, you know, Cassiopeia up in the stars. You know, he would
Yes.
go to the telescopes, like the big ones in the white building,
Yeah.
and like look at the rings on Saturn. And then he would tell us the mythology around, you know, Saturn and like the Roman history and like all this stuff. So it was just like endless stories. And then on my mom's side, they're cowboys and ranchers, and so again, endless stories. And
Right.
that's just kind of where this all comes from, is that there's so much more to the world than what I can see every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. So you grew up supplementing the stories from your family with fantasy novels?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. Did you have
I
a
was like,
favorite?
yeah. Sorry?
Did you have a favorite?
As a kid, did you ever know what the Dinotopia series?
I heard of them. Yeah.
Yeah. So the artwork in those are amazing. They're so astounding. They're just beautiful. Um that was a big one. Beyond that, I mean, Isaac Asimov is
Mm,
wonderful reading.
yeah.
I just love it. I mean, I realize it doesn't fall under the fantasy realm, but like sci-fi and fantasy,
Yeah.
while
They're
separate, are
related.
also they
Yeah.
make excellent pairs.
They do.
Uh,
Agreed.
yeah. Yeah. So just like tons of that. And then whatever I could pick up at friends' places when I was visiting, you know, comic books, early graphic novel stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about any favorite fantasy movies as a kid?
Didn't really get into fantasy movies when I was a kid. I
Really?
always felt that fantasy movies, when I was like, that I saw that were from the 80s and the 90s, I was like, they're close, but none of them are hitting the mark. I didn't really enjoy any of them until The Fifth Element. The Fifth Element changed. That was finally, it was like, okay, fantasy sci-fi has finally figured it out. Like, this is like the first step to figuring it out. So the 70s and 80s and early 90s to me felt like mostly it was like concept art for what fantasy was going to become.
Okay.
Which is what we're starting to see now. Now I'm starting to see these fantasy movies that are coming out and these video games that it's like, okay, yeah, that's what everyone was trying to do 30 years ago.
Gotcha.
And that's super, super, super cool. And I love it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's so funny because I devoured fantasy movies as well as a kid. I mean, all of the books, of course, but as a kid, I was like, oh man, the Labyrinth and Legend and anything that was, I just ate it up like candy.
I don't know. I don't know why it was. Like, I always felt like they were like the rough sketch,
Right.
I was like, I can see what they're doing, but I could see the puppetry. And while I love puppetry, I love amazing puppetry, right? Like, that is such an amazing, like, incredible art that I hope never really goes away. Same with like claymation and all that kind of stuff. I love it. But I always felt like, okay, the technology to create what these people are trying to make literally just doesn't exist yet. And in 20 years, this is going to be awesome. And sure enough, like, it has exceeded all of my expectations.
It's so crazy that as a kid, you had that sense, like being able to see where something was going, but that it wasn't quite where it needed to be in order to so it was like to pull off that suspension of disbelief, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It was just something that was always there for me. Like, that the one exception would have been cartoons. So
sure,
the Last Unicorn, for example. Yeah, that's like an incredible work of art. And the way it is great, just the way it is. So the animated stuff, I have a different opinion of. So the animated films, I mean, those are beautiful.
Sure.
And no, Kate, I didn't like Willow either. Fuck that whole film.
Oh no, there's gonna be a fight.
Yeah.
I can't wait till she responds to that one.
No, I know, but I mean, I understand why so many people love those films, but yeah, it never felt complete to me. It was just like, yeah, it's getting there, but it's not there yet. And so Kate's logging out.
She's like, we can't be friends no more.
I love you, Kate.
That's understandable though, because the suspension of disbelief is built into cartoons. You watch a cartoon recognizing that what you're watching is a piece of art, whereas with a movie, you're kind of invited to be inside in a way. And if it, for whatever reason, doesn't feel believable, then it makes sense that it didn't capture you the way that it should have.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, one of the comments there was that they're doing a reboot. And I do think that some films just don't need to be rebooted.
Yeah.
That they are these like perfect time capsules of, the peak of innovation and inspiration and creativity, like at that time.
Sure.
And I think that they should be like cherished for that.
Yeah.
Right. And they like, it's not that I didn't enjoy the film. So that doesn't mean I don't appreciate what they did for the genre.
Sure.
Which is like, they totally broke through and changed everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. You'll hear a lot of people talk about that, and in regards to Tolkien, where they'll be like, I couldn't get through it. I found it boring and dry. Like, I recognize that it was a masterpiece that changed things, but for whatever reason, they just can't live in that world. And I'm like eating it with a shovel, Is there more? Give me the Silmarillion. I'll shove that in too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like Tolkien, Silmarillion and all that, they were great. I mean, my favorite thing about the Lord of the Rings series is reading the stories around the author, so understanding. I mean, one of my things that I'm really, really interested in, and I don't really know why, I'm very interested in World War history. Sure. The First and Second World War specifically. I don't know why.
Doesn't have to have a reason.
But the most interesting part for me is dissecting the book and realizing, okay, these ideas probably came from, these ideas probably came from these experiences that Tolkien had. Of course, he lost, I believe he lost a son in the war, maybe two. I think it won though. And then of course he's writing that scene where, and of course now that I'm doing this interview, I can't remember the name of the character, he's killed, and he says, you know, no son should ever have to bury, or no father should ever have to bury his
Theoden
child.
and Theodred.
Theodred, that's it. Thank you. Sorry,
Yeah.
it's one of those days.
That's okay.
But
There's lots of names to remember in Tolkien.
exactly. Yeah. Oh my God. There's so many like Worm Peaks. You're just like, who the fuck?
So many.
Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, I think that's really interesting for me, that it's like, okay, you know, this is the world that the author was living in the time, and this is how it translates into a fantasy story. And so you're going like, you know, these are written from places of experience, not just like, what would it be like if, you know? And so I think that's what makes that writing so effective.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you can translate your personal experiences, even if it's not a one-to-one translation, but a lot of writing is really dealing with your own shit through other characters. Like you almost cannot help but do that. So I agree. The more personal, and I know I feel like I've said this on this show now like 8 bazillion times, but the more personal you make something, the more universal it becomes, because there's honesty and vulnerability that make it easier for other people to be able to connect to those ideas or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm rereading, and I'm going to butcher the name. This is another one of the, you know, when there's names where you've only read it, but you never heard it spoken.
Yes.
So like the Giger Geiger thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I read, I don't know if you've ever heard any David Eddings books, but in the Elenium, there's a character whose name is Sophrenia, but I always read it as Sophrena. And so in my head, she will always be Sophrena. And the first time I heard somebody say Sophrenia, I was like, what? It's not, it's like, I can't accept that now.
Yeah. So there's the author, R.A. Salvatore.
Yes.
Salvatore. I'm, again, not really sure what the correct pronunciation of it is. However, what I think is interesting, I'm rereading his the Crystal Shard series, so the original batch. And so what's really interesting is watching how this author translates, of course, like racism back when nobody in fantasy was talking about racism, really.
Yeah.
You know, like those topics were there. And now I'm in like the last 4 books in the series. I think there's like 12 or something.
Sure.
I'm in the last 4 books, and it's going into dealing with PTSD. And of course, I believe the timeline, this was written around the Gulf War. I think anyways. And so then I sit there and I question, I'm like, okay, so how, like, it's so, again, interesting how the author is translating what's going on around him and turning it into a relatable fantasy experience, right? Because I mean, I have friends who have served overseas. Some of them came back, some of them didn't. Some of them came back very different than who they were when they left. And it's interesting to see all the stuff that I can see in some of these friends in like a fantasy novel.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that I don't know if I will ever make anything that relatable en masse to people. And I think that's something that is like a really interesting challenge for me, because I know visually that's not my goal for photography, but you know, how can I take the experiences that I have and work them into something that is that experience for other people? How do I give people those kinds of experiences? And I don't have the answer yet, but it's something that I've been like churning on for the last like 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that's been on my mind, as far as I have this compulsion to want to make art that matters, like something that when somebody sees it, they're not just going, oh, pretty, like, and then continuing to go, something that, you know, really speaks to them. And how, like, the ability to do that seems to be nebulous at best.
Yeah, Kate makes a point about the fantasy genre has always been much more inclusive. Yeah, my favorite thing, whenever I see people like rambling online about, you know, like, oh, women are never represented and like we're always weak and whatever, and I'm just like, man, you got to get into fucking fantasy novel and comic books. Like,
for real,
it's awesome in there.
Like, have you never read anything where a chick had crazy powers or an awesome sword, or she was like super smart and did all the things? Like, all of that stuff is in fantasy.
Right. Yeah. So I was so oblivious to that growing up, because of, you know, growing up on a farm. You have to you're like 12 years old and you have to throw this like huge hay bale over the fence. And it's not like, if I can do it, it's like, it has to be done because the horses need to eat. So I never had like this like barrier in my head of like what women can do and what men can do and how they're perceived differently in the media. Like I missed all of that. And then I
Right.
got older, I was in my 20s, and I was like, why is everyone going on about this? And I started like, because I just wasn't interested in pop culture. I
Sure.
started like reading in, and I was like, oh my God, like people who bought into this got kind of fucked up. Like, that's not fair. I'm like, you need more fantasy in your life.
For real. That is
You
the
really
answer
need-
right there.
You need more fantasy in your life. You need
That
more
is the answer to
superheroes.
all of it.
Yeah.
So, and then heading over to the comments section, which brings up some interesting things we can talk about specifically in relation to the genre that you, or genres, I suppose, that you work in. As you were talking about feeling like fantasy movies as you were growing up weren't quite where it felt like they needed to be to fully express what they were capable of. Kate Woodman says, but for real though, I feel the same way about fantasy photography as you do about fantasy films. It's not quite there yet in general. And then Becca responded with, yeah, I think the label has some weird connotations in itself. And then Kate responded with, truth fantasy art is amazing, less so with photography. So
Yes,
what do you
I
think?
totally agree. I 100% agree with that. Yeah, I think fantasy photography is getting there. I think that fantasy photography is in the 90s of fantasy films. And will it never really achieve that? I don't actually know, because fantasy is so, it leans itself so strongly towards a 3D and illustration realm where it dominates. I mean, fantasy in that realm is phenomenally good.
Agreed.
Is it simply the fact that because we have humans who have to deal with gravity, and that why fantasy doesn't translate quite as well in photography as it can in these other forms? Is it just like the real life physics of this is the body and these are the rules that we have to play by? Whereas, when you look at great fantasy art, especially in 3D, there is no concept of gravity. Any great artwork, gravity doesn't necessarily play a role. There's a suspension of physics on some level. And in photography, that's hard to break. One of the few exceptions, of course, being underwater photography.
Right.
Where there, fantasy photography starts to get a little bit closer to that line.
Yeah,
so yeah, it's a conversation I have in my head all the time.
Yeah, for sure. And then trying to figure out so I think in some ways, at least for my own work, I feel like what I feel compelled to do is always like alter the color to take it out of the realm of believable color, so that it's like to the point where it's like, okay, nobody's skin is that green, but something about that, and I don't know why green in particular is a thing for me, but there's something about when the color is not believable that tells you it's on purpose, I guess, as opposed to when you're trying to maintain something like an actual color palette. There's this, for me at least, this mental disconnect between, okay, real world scenario, not real world thing, or graphic that doesn't quite measure up to what it needs to be in order to feel believable, I guess, that are maybe harder to do with photography than they might be for an artist who, like, for example, I just interviewed Tyler Jacobson, and most of his stuff is hand painted, either in oils or let me just whack my earbuds.
So happens when you get excited. You're just hands.
No, it's good. I'm just gonna like pull my ears off. Or in Photoshop, but you never question the believability of his art. And maybe that's because it's inherently in a medium that's not meant to, or is not forced to conform to reality.
Yeah. Our brain already just like switches a gear and goes like, okay, cool. And just like accepts it that it is separate from, these realities that we have to pay attention to.
Right.
In real life.
Do you think there are any tricks or things that you try to do to be able to pull off a composited or photograph that has that feeling of surreality?
I think there's only one image that I've ever made that successfully pushed that boundary, and that's the girl jumping off the building with the little tiny wings.
Okay.
I think that's the only one, because physics, your brain goes like, okay, yeah, physics, she's jumping off a building. And then your brain goes, holy fucking shit, she's jumping off a building.
Yeah.
And then that disbelief kicks in again, right? And so it's the only image I've ever made that people had like a visceral physical reaction to.
Sure.
I peaked young. That image is old. But in that case, I created an image within the realms of physics and the rules that we have to pay attention to. And left the ending open. So you don't actually
Sure.
know if this girl who jumped off the building is just committing suicide and like that's her angel wings,
Right.
right? Like because it leaves it open for so much interpretation.
Sure.
But it's still playing within the rules that we have to live by every single day. But there's that little bit of disbelief still. And so I've been chasing that. And
Yeah.
I've never been able to replicate it without just doing another one of those images.
Yeah.
And even though I have made a similar type of image since then, none of them have had the same impact as that single shot.
So you think
Ever.
somehow finding the proper tension between believing that something could exist versus maybe not necessarily exist in our reality, like there's a tension that those are pushing on, that particular image just hit on the head.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was the only one that I've done out of all the work I've made that was a home run in that regard, where it was like, what is that a composite? Was it shot with like, like a Ben Von, well, which of course I would never do. Anyone who knows me is like, yeah, it's a composite. But if you don't know me or my work, then the question that was coming out of the time was, was this shot using ropes, and the ropes were edited out? Like, was it used a harness? Like, because Ben does that all the time.
Sure.
Beautiful work. And he does it all on camera. So then there's like those questions that pop in of just like, well, how was that made? Because clearly she didn't just jump off the top of a skyscraper.
Right.
Which, ironically, I should point out, Ben did help me make that image because he was rooftopping in friggin' Hong Kong. And I was like, Ben, I know you're on top of a building. Give me some files.
Give me.
I'm never, ever standing on the edge of a skyscraper. There's not a chance.
I'm not really afraid of heights, but there is something about
there's a limit.
Buildings and the edge of buildings that just like, I can stand on the edge of a mountain and peer off forever, but the edge of a building for some reason feels like everything in me kind of rebels against that idea.
Yeah. No, there's something about skyscrapers specifically that like, I don't have a fear of heights, like 9 out of 10 times, but there's something about like, oh, we are 60 stories up. Wow, that is far.
Yeah. And I think maybe knowing that is a thing people do, like that's a scary thing people do, just makes it more like there's no reason to be up here except to throw yourself off the edge. And that's not a fantastic idea.
Yeah, exactly.
So jumping into our comments real quick, Molly asks, then what about when you combine photography with 3D and digital art? Is that something you're looking at, or
I love again, that's like the next iteration of compositing. That's like barreling down the line, and it's getting done really, really well. I am learning 3D. I'm very slow at it.
It's hard.
My brain is getting slower as I'm getting older.
Yeah.
There's no way I can teach myself Blender the way I taught myself Photoshop. It's not going to
happen. Man, I know Becca is like diving deep into that world. It's so fun to see the stuff that she's building.
So good. So good. Yeah, I love it. And there's so many who are doing like an amazing job of combining 3D and photography. Then that becomes always the question of like, well, then it's just pure digital art with like a small photographic element. You have like a face on somebody and the rest of the body and the rest of the environment is 3D generated. Then it just becomes 3D art with a photographic element. And then is it really truly photography anymore? And then that whole fucking conversation starts all over again. And I don't actually care what the answer is.
Yeah, I don't understand why that is a conversation in the first place, because you're using a camera as part of the process of creating a piece of art. Does it really matter, aside from being able to give definitions for the sake of, let's say, if you're getting hired as a photojournalist, but you are a digital artist and photographer, is that something you're going to be able to do? So for the sake of having like those kind of definitions, I can understand being able to like elucidate what you're doing. But if the purpose is to create a final piece, then I don't understand why it matters how we go about it.
Yeah. I mean, it just depends on the audience that you're going for. I mean, obviously, if you're entering in photographic competitions, there's going to be rules there, but depending on who you're entering for. But at the end of the day, if you are and I hate this word, but if you are a content creator for your clients and they don't care what tools you're using as long as you can deliver on time, then that's like, it's just another tool in your arsenal in my mind. So I think, there's a good comment there from Becca, is cinematography not valued anymore with movies mostly in CGI? Well, CGI, the way CGI movies look, came from the foundation of cinematography. And that's why like in our brains, we have this idea of like what a movie looks like versus what, your iPhone video
Yeah.
looks like. There's like a taste and a flavor and experience and a style in there.
Well, and even with CGI, as they literally have a camera in the computer that they move in certain ways in order to mimic the movement of real cameras. So I mean,
Yeah.
the functionality isn't any different in the end.
And I straight up, I work very rarely. I shouldn't say I don't work in film, but I very rarely work in film, so I can't really speak from any point of authority on it other than a fan.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
but yeah, there's so much. I mean, that being said though, also there's so much amazing cinematography out there that isn't 3D. One of my favorite documentaries is called Wormwood. I don't know if you've seen that one yet.
I haven't.
So this goes back to like my side projects. It's on the recently declassified MK Ultra project.
Oh God.
Yeah. So it's
I'm
really
gonna take a drink now because that's some intense shit right there. For anybody who has not ever heard of MK Ultra, read up on that and let your mind
just
be
watch
blown.
this documentary. It's amazing. But like on top of the fact that it's an amazing documentary and it's very interesting because it's about the son of one of the men who created the program and
Okay.
was ultimately terminated. He fell out of a building, which is the basis of the documentary. He fell out of a building. And it's his son, 50 years later or whatever, who has now become a psychologist, who is like, how does a man fall out of a building? And then he deep dives into all this, and then it becomes this amazing documentary. Anyways, that all aside, it is phenomenally filmed. I have watched it on mute just to enjoy how it was shot. And it's not. I mean, I'm sure there's VFX in there because every film most of the time has VFX these days, but it's very subtle. It is beautifully shot. The cast that they have in it is incredible because it's like acted plus it's like that docudrama thing.
Yeah.
Oh my God. It's just phenomenal. So anyone who's like, oh, cinematography doesn't matter anymore. And I'm like, it's just better than ever. Like it's so good.
Oh, it's so good. There's so much happening now, even with films like 1917 where they're doing first person, like even like that. Nobody's done that before. Like there are still so many boundaries to be broke. Not at that level.
1917, just like how they made that film is just as amazing as the film itself. Like it just blew my mind. And I mean, again, that's like a technological leap because a lot of the shots that they were made couldn't have happened without the invention of this like really tiny lightweight cinema camera. So yeah, it's so cool. I'm so excited to be like expired in this industry where I'll just be like too dumb and slow to keep up, and I'm just gonna sit there with popcorn and just enjoy it all. I'll I'll have some other job doing I don't know what, but I'm just going to just bask in the glory that is the next generation of cinema and digital creators because it's just so free.
Agree. Which does beg the question. Oh, I think I lost her for just a minute. Let's hope Renee comes back up. If we do lose Renee, guys, I will restart this. We'll get her back onto a new one and we will restart. Let's see. Whoop. All right, so that was Renee. She told me that they lost internet again. So right now we'll see whether or not we can get her restarted. In the meantime, I'll see if she can come back up. And let's see here. So we'll get to some of the comments real quick while I wait for Renee.
Sorry, dude. Like I said, this is a thing that's happening. I don't fucking know why.
Hey, we're still here. So I was like, yeah, we'll hang out and see if we can get her back on there. So I'm really glad that you came back in.
Yeah, no, I have this new router and it just like disconnects, and it doesn't disconnect on any of the other devices in the house. So I think it's a Windows update. And I really despise Apple, but Windows is pissing me off. I'm like mutual dislike for them right now.
So jumping back to where we were before we lost you,
Yeah.
talking about kind of the new generation of how everything is coming together, that kind of begs the question, what does the future now look like for artists like you? Like, where are you going? Are you kind of paying attention to trends and seeing how you can transition or what you can do? Like, what does that mean for the future of this kind of genre?
Well, I mean, genres are constantly evolving, and there's always the question of, do you want to evolve or do you not want to evolve with it?
Sure.
Like that was like the punch into digital, right? How many,
Right.
and I've been in this industry now for 23 years, so I watched that transition happen in the middle of it, obviously from the other side though, but I
Right.
watched, you know, a lot of really well-known photographers just like turn to smoke and their businesses vaporized because they didn't keep up with digital.
Yeah,
They were
and
just
Anne Geddes doesn't make work anymore. I
yeah,
mean,
right.
and she
Yeah,
was
there's
like the name of all the names for a while.
yeah, 100%. And I mean, that is from what I understand, happened with 2008, so that was more than just digital. There
Right.
was a recession and everyone picked up any job that they could to keep food on the table for their kids. And that's why 2008 had this huge explosion of photography. So there's that side of it, but there's so many who just couldn't or didn't want to, reinvest hundreds of $1,000s in some of their cases into digital, or they didn't want to learn it, or they were just like, no, this is, or they could see what was coming because photography once upon a time did pay on average a lot more than it does now. Now, literally, like our phones are good enough for most people that
Sure.
it eliminates an entire industry that used to exist and was very profitable in the 80s and 90s and so on and so forth. The other side of it now is that more people can get photography than they ever could before.
Right.
So there's like two sides of it, right? Whereas like once before you had like a photo session every 10 years with your family, now you can go out and you can have endless photos.
Yeah. True.
So I think that no matter what, I mean, again, film is still, it came back to being relevant again in
Right.
photography. So there is always a place for excellence, regardless of what your field is, I think. And sometimes you have to wait for the market to come back to you.
True.
So I've done this now for 12 years, and I have seen the trend of fantasy go in and out of style 3 times now, right? Whereas some years, like I am so busy I can't sleep, and then other years I don't have a client for like 3 months.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, just market yourself better. And I'm like, literally, what people are looking for is not what I'm making. And people are like, well, why don't you innovate? And I'm like, because this is what I like to do, right? I can photograph other stuff. I do photograph other stuff. However, this is the stuff that I like to do. And if I'm going to spend my time doing a bunch of stuff that I don't like to do, which is going to put me in I'm going to be expired eventually, probably. But if I'm going to be doing a bunch of stuff that I don't like to do, I'm going to go to a career where I don't have to fight to get paid every
Yeah.
single time. Right.
Right. Like I'm just going to go work at McDonald's for a while. Like, why would I
have more skills?
No.
I don't have to go that low, but
well, but you know what I mean? Like, I'm just going to
Yeah.
go find like a job, like a regular job for a little while until I don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think that and I haven't had to take a break yet like that, but I do think that there's this really weird like stigma around like, oh, you took a break and went back to like regular work for a while. And I'm like, who the fuck cares if someone goes back to regular work for a little while? Like a break is sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself.
Sure. Which is a weird
Like,
thing that other artists don't deal with. Like most writers work a regular job. Even fairly well-known writers have some other form of income
100%.
because there's times when you just don't sell. So it's a hard genre to make a living in. So
yeah, anything creative, it's a hard time to make a living in. I mean, again, looking at what's happened to the music industry, it's like decimated by streaming,
right.
but yet that is where we've gone.
Yeah.
Streaming is the main consumption now. We don't buy albums anymore like we used to and just like play the same album over and over and over and over and over on repeat, right? So it's kind of funny how everything is evolving, and I don't know if anyone can really truly accurately predict it. but
Then
I
maybe some
really
people
like
just get
watching.
luckier than others.
I just really like watching all the predictions because like the truth is probably somewhere in the middle of all of them.
Sure.
Like probably most people have some idea of what's going to happen, but like the reality is this like tiny little nucleus in the middle that's like a little bit of all those tiny pieces. Yeah, so I don't know. I'm super curious to see where it goes. While I am a bit of like slow, I'm not an early adopter on anything. People are like, oh, you should get on TikTok, and I'm like, fuck TikTok. But I was that with Facebook, I was that with Instagram, I was that with Twitter, I was that with Snapchat. I was just like,
Yeah.
no, these are not my things. And then eventually they become my things, and I'm like way behind the bell curve, and I'm fine with it.
I just can't maintain anything else at this point. Like what I have going right now consumes so much of my time that I do not want to put anything else on my plate.
Yeah, exactly. But so, and then what's happening from there though is, and so that's how this like evolution happens, and how we eventually kind of expire ourselves in some ways, is that we have a full plate already with what we have. And then the next generation of creators that are coming up don't have a full plate. They've just discovered their career. They get on to the next, the next big thing, whatever it is, in the early stages, and they're just having fun. And then like, bam, they've taken off, and we're MySpace.
Yeah. Oh God. So before we get to a couple of the questions and comments, that kind of leads into where I was going before with the question, which is like, you brought up the music industry, and we're kind of watching that change, and it's an innovate or die thing, right? Like at the point where like touring doesn't make you money and CDs or albums don't make you money, you have to start innovating. And there's a good chance, I think, we're going to see a lot more artists just hosting pay for play things, probably on online platforms, where instead of going to concerts or whatever, it's going to be paying to get into a Zoom room where somebody's playing in their living room. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
that's already happening. Yeah.
Right, 100%. So we have this kind of, it's a democratization where now there is no gatekeeper to stop people from making whatever they want and getting it out to the masses. However, that means everything is diluted and there's less money to be made on the whole. So then the question becomes like, where do we have to get to in that evolution where people, because there will be people who win, right? Like there will be people who will come out of this thing better off than they ever were before, because somehow they figured out how to ride the wave that's coming. So then that becomes the question, like, can you do that? Is there a way that we can do that? And if we can, how?
Yeah, so I mean that's where the downfall of being a one-person show starts off, because people who are able to evolve means that they have breathing room on their plate. And if your plate's already super full, you have to delegate in order to make more room for more space. So that's where teams, or just some people, just like super risky, they just stop paying attention to one platform. They're just like, nope, next, putting all my energy into the next thing. And maybe that is the smart choice. I don't really have the answer. That I'm not a marketing expert. I just kind of figure this shit out along the way, and I just kind of try to pay attention to what's going on around me. But that is definitely one of the things that you have to pay attention to is, yeah, there's 24 hours in a day, and you need 8 of those to sleep, or 6 of those to sleep, or whatever. And then you have kids, and you have dogs, and you have to change the oil in the vehicle, and all of a sudden your actual productive hours towards your career are about 4 hours.
4, yeah, that seems
6 hours if you're lucky, right? Like of actual effective hours, not just like I'm sitting in front of my computer for 12 hours.
No, yeah, 4. I think
you were
is
also
fair.
on YouTube and Facebook, and
don't lie to yourself.
not doing the work stuff, right? Yeah, so it's just like, it's a constant thing, and that is the one thing that this democratization of the arts has done, is it has put a lot of pressure onto the creator, whereas before it used to be like you had an agency or an agent, and you had a team of people around you, and that one face brought in a lot of money to pay for all these people's wages. And so now it's, you're bringing in your bit of money and it's going into you, and then you have to figure out, okay, well, how can I make enough to support 2 people's wages if I'm going to be bringing someone else on? And how you do that, the answer is literally different for every single creator I know. I mean, I know some people who are doing gangbusters well on Patreon, and other people can't get $5 a month. And even though the quality of the content is the same, right? And maybe they just like happen to hit the right mark when there was a certain algorithm on Patreon at one time.
Right.
Then, you know, maybe the algorithm changed. I mean, people are like, well, how'd you get like, you know, my Facebook page used to have like 97,000 followers on it. I think it's down to like 93,000 now. People are like, oh my God, how did you do that? And I was like, the algorithm was different. And that's it. You know, people are like, well, how did you get 26,000 people on your Instagram page? And I'm like, well, at first, early on, the algorithm was different, but also I'm a super late adopter to Instagram. I was not doing it for the same reasons that I'm doing it now. If I had, I probably maybe would have been higher. I don't actually, I mean, I'm not, again, a social media expert.
Right.
I'm glad there's a comment of where'd all the bots go. I'm so glad all the bots are gone. I think that's why the numbers on my Facebook page have dropped down to the number that they have, because there were so many bots. Like, and I was never one to pay for any of that shit.
No.
But yeah, it was just like it's different math on these systems that we have to play along to now. I was just watching a really interesting YouTube video about there's a content creating company on YouTube that makes these like 5-minute crafts or whatever.
Oh yeah.
And how they're fake. Like they're just like, oh yeah, like here's your yellow shoe and you put this mixture on it and then it becomes a white shoe and that's it. Like ta-da! But it's like it's actually a different size shoe even. It's not even the same kind of shoe. It's the same kind of shoe, but like a different it's literally a different shoe.
Right. Yeah.
But they have literally figured out how to hack the algorithm. They're putting out like 2,700 videos a month.
Yep. That's one of the reasons they had to go and make stricter regulations around what was put out for children, because people were using children to buff their numbers, and like it is insanity.
Yeah, so it's bonkers. I mean, if you don't have any moral code, there's definitely ways to hack the system.
Oh yeah. You can go out and just create controversy around your product or your work or something like that by pretending to be somebody else and lying about what you do and talking about how it's a terrible thing. And then people just jump on the outrage train and all of a sudden numbers go way up.
Yeah. That is like a very risky maneuver that we've seen done in the past. And it works very well, but it is so risky because it actually can just destroy everything that you have built. Yeah, it's super risky. I mean, I don't recommend it. I don't ever want
God, I hope that people please don't do that. Aside from being like morally probably very dark gray, it's just not a good idea.
100%. But then they'll say on the other side of it, they're just like, yeah, but I want to pay for my kids to go to a good college. So of course I'm going to do this because this gives my children an opportunity. And that is the beauty of the free market. You know, for as long as we have it anyways. We'll see what happens with your current administration and social media.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I don't even have like the emotional bandwidth to get into that bullshit. Yeah. So Reality Reimagined is asking question, do you see more commercial clients seeking more evolved fantasy work that includes things like 3D elements?
I guess that depends on who you're selling to. I mean, obviously if you're pitching to game studios, obviously that's a lot of 3D, if not 100% 3D. If you are pitching to VFX companies, that's a lot of 3D. If you're going to advertising cares how fast you can get it done to the specifications that they want. So if you're using 3D and they're comfortable with that, then awesome. If they are, if they have a spec that their spec sheet says it has to be 100% photography, well, then it has to be 100% photography.
Right.
Because there is like the backlash to the VFX thing right now, which is why we're seeing a spike in film work of like, this was shot on 35 mil, and there's like a thing to that people feel good about, kind of like the no retouching campaign that Ari did.
Yeah.
Right. So there's always
it's an artisan thing, right? Like it's artisan photography is like the film part is kind of being touted. It feels that way anyway. It's like buying artisan bread instead of Sara Lee. That's like
yeah, exactly. But it's a pendulum swing, right? And it's always going to go back. It's always going to go back and forth. And so you have to pay attention to when you think it's going to swing this way, because as soon as film went completely away and like Kodak crumbled and all this other stuff, like then I was watching it and I was like, film's going to come back. It's not going to be what it was, but it's going to become this like niche thing that people are going to want to have associated with their brand and with their business eventually. And it did. It has swung back again a little bit more.
Yep.
But yeah, so that like it's knowing your customer and the customer knowing what their customers want.
Sure.
So
yeah. Go ahead.
No, it's just that there's a time and there's place for both.
Sure.
Right now.
So for people who, you know, this is what they want to do. They want to make fantasy or surreal style images. It seems like the biggest struggle. And one of the questions that I get when I write articles or things that are like, hey, check out these fantasy photographers, a lot of people go, these are super pretty, but how do you make money doing this? Right. What advice do you give to those photographers that are like heading into this realm, but really don't know where they're going?
Well, I mean, fantasy is definitely a hard sell. It's definitely a hard sell. I mean, like there's a reason why, fantasy. Okay, so first of all, fantasy has to be defined, and it is a broad term. Everything in vogue is fantasy, right? Some of those models are 14 years old. They are not 25, and they should not be surrounded by that many shirtless men. Right? That's fantasy. Victoria's Secret fantasy. Right. You know, so there's like that believable, and then there's like the Game of Thrones fantasy, right? And then there's Dungeons and Dragons fantasy.
Sure. Do we have a name for the difference?
I'm sure there is. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm sure there is one.
I was hoping that you were gonna have one, Renee. Come, you goddess of all the things, tell me.
There's like historical fantasy, and then there's like modern fantasy, and then there's erotic fantasy, and there's like, you know, all of these different things. So, I mean, essentially all advertising is fantasy. I mean, you look at beauty retouching. It's not real. It's not supposed to be real. It's literally there to sell makeup products and skin products and hair products. Yeah, Gary says with dragons or without. Yeah, fair.
Yeah, we'll just call it dragon fantasy.
Yeah.
That includes, you know, fantastical elements related to the imagination and human fairy tales and mythology. It's a really long title, but that's what we'll say.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, if you're going for like historical fantasy or like classic, like whatever you want to call it, dragon fantasy.
Dragon fantasy.
That'll do the trick.
That'll do it.
You know, then the places to sell that, the easiest place to sell that kind of stuff is book covers. And book covers, there's more book covers being licensed now than I think ever before, because there's so many more authors now than ever before, but it also pays a lot less than ever before.
Yes, it do.
You know, book covers used to pay really, really well. And if you get a New York Times bestselling author, which I think a New York Times bestselling author has to be 1,500 sales or something like that. I forget. It's actually not as high of a number that I thought it would be.
Yeah, and it's a lot more. They don't even necessarily have hard and fast parameters. They get to fudge things because they can do what they want. So
yeah, well, it is a marketing tactic of if you get an author with a New York Times bestselling list name, then obviously you can charge more, because the place is how many eyes are going to see that book and how much money they're going to make off of your covers. These are the things you have to think about when you're licensing. You're like, oh, it's just a book cover, so like $250, and you're like, cool. But how many times is that going to get printed, and how much money is that artwork going to make that author? So you have to price that in. And obviously, most authors, 99% of authors, don't have a lot of money, and $250 is all they can afford, because they're only going to sell 100 copies of that book. They're going to try to sell 500, but they might only sell 100 over like a year or 2 or 5. Some of them have got Google ads figured out, and they're going to sell 2,000, but they're self-published, and they're going to sell 2,000 over 4 years. Right. So you have to kind of try to figure out what the marketing strategy is for some of these authors. And because, of course, the point of a book cover is to make them sales, right? It is an advertisement. People say like, oh, don't judge a book by its cover. I buy books with cool covers. I buy books with uncool covers too. But especially when it comes to the fantasy genre, really cool covers will make me pick up a book. And I will totally check it out based on that. And I realize I'm a bastard for it.
Well, you're just a human. That's just, we do that. That's just.
Exactly. So yeah. And so then you have to balance out like, okay, how are you licensing pre-created work, you know, that you've already made? And then like, how many times is that book going to be sold? Do you have a relicensing fee? So if they say, I'm going to license this for 100 printed book copies, and then they print 100 printed books, and they're like, oh, actually, you know what? This book took off. I've made another 100. I'm going to try to print another 100 copies, what's a relicensing fee? And obviously
Right.
that is often, at least in my case, in my practice, I charge a relicensing fee for less than what the original licensing fee is, because I mean, at the end of the day, I'm there to make money, but also I'm there because I want other people to make money too. Like
Sure.
I want people to be successful doing the things that they love to do.
Right.
And I
That's an
love being able to help
ecosystem,
that.
right?
Yeah.
Like you treat them well, you care about them. Chances are they will come back to you or refer you to people, or, I mean, that's just good all the way around.
Yeah. Yeah. So, book covers is a huge one. I get, I get a lot of weird reactions when I say this one though, but I do a lot of work for exotic dancers.
Sure.
And I love working with exotic dancers. They're so much fun, and they always have, like, at least the ones that I get anyways, there's lots of exotic dancers, and it's just like glam, right? And you're like, cool, we're done.
Sure.
Like, yeah, let's do that. And then I get this other ones that it's like, I have this amazing kimono set. Like I have one woman that I work with, and she has the most incredible kimono set, like literally $10,000 kimonos.
Oh gosh.
And they're her obsession, and they're gorgeous, you
Because
know.
they're works
like,
of art.
That's what they are. They're works of art,
Yeah.
right? And so then it's like, you know, okay, well, let's make some like really cool, gorgeous photographs of you with these kimonos that you can sell at your shows. And of course, now that COVID and everything, it fucks it all up. But regardless, you know, they can sell these images. They have OnlyFans, like all this kind of stuff. And you know, fantasy actually does have a lot of fun in those realms.
Sure.
You know, because
there's a reason people loved Princess Leia in her slave bikini.
Right. Yeah. That's a thing. And it's hot.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So, but you know, I always think it's funny when people are just like, oh, you work in like the sex industry. And I'm like, yeah, I'm okay with it.
And
stripping,
what is your
100%
point?
legal.
Right.
Exotic dancing, completely legal. Burlesque, completely legal, you know, and I love these clients, and they always have like really, really, really great ideas. And I mean, burlesque girls especially have incredible costumes.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times, especially if you have a career dancer, not just someone who's like, you know, oh, I'm, you know, like trying to figure out what I'm trying to do with my life, and I'm just going to take up dancing. You know, that's a different experience. But for career dancers, people who have been doing it for 5, 10, 15 years, you know, they know what they like. They want really good quality. They're willing to pay for it, and they're going to make their return on their investment, right? Because at the end of the day, what we're creating for these people, whether it's books, whether it's posters, whether it's whatever, movie art, key art, it's to help make them money. And that's the fantasy realm anyways, can lend itself really nicely to that genre.
Sure. So where do you find them then? So let's say you're like, okay, I'm going to get into the book cover realm. You know, I have these, maybe some I've already created, or some I could potentially create based on, you know, let's pretend COVID doesn't exist that way. And then if it does exist, like it does, then maybe you have, you know, like a stock library or something where you could make images for that. So then you have the images. How do you actually go about finding that market? Like, where do you look? Because it used to be you would have an agent who could put you in touch with publishing houses. And now there are so many more independent authors and, you know, other things. So how do people go about doing that?
Yeah. So strangely enough, Twitter is super active for authors.
It is.
Surprisingly, I didn't realize it was so active for authors. It's far more active than it is for Facebook or Instagram, obviously, because those are image-based websites and video-based websites. So Twitter's great. Goodreads and LinkedIn, you know, these, I forget the stats. There was like, I forget how many millions of users on Goodreads every month.
Yeah.
Like crazy. You know, and obviously, you know, you can check by like rating, and you can search for new authors, and you can just cold call authors. And sometimes their budget is like, yeah, you know, I just started, I got $50, and that's up to you to decide if you want to do that or not. You know, and you're like anything else, you're gonna have to spend some time finding clients that you want to work with, because there is such a thing as clients where you're just like, okay, I charged you $250 for this licensing, and I gave you like one revision, and now we're on revision 7, and I hate my life.
Yeah.
That's also going to happen with new authors, because they're not necessarily professionals in the field yet, where they don't understand really how image licensing and image creation for book covers can work. Yeah. So that can be like a little bit of like bash your head into the wall experience.
Yeah, that's where you have to set expectations like very clearly from the beginning, because
Yeah, at that point, your job, especially when you're working with new authors, is to help educate them on how to communicate effectively between the two of you. But yeah, and oftentimes the other thing that'll happen, very experienced authors have their artists. They have their artists that they like, and that's it, and so you're just like, cool, like I'll wait around for you to like make another series or something where you're going to go for a completely different look, because that's something that I've done before also with authors. I'll make a series of artwork for a series, and they'll go with a different author or a different artist, for a completely different series, where I look at what they're looking for and I'm like, yeah, no, I got nothing. I can't make that for you. Yeah. The other thing that happens also is album artwork used to be really good money for bands. Obviously, that's not necessarily the case anymore. It's not at all what it used to be, but it is still a place where you can make some money. There are agencies that you can work through. I forget the names of them right now. Again, this is like the other name that I couldn't remember. But you can start looking them up online. But you do have to understand, going through agencies, the pay is not amazing, but it's also better than nothing.
Sure.
That price also, like with book covers, has gone down over the years, because it used to be you bought an album and it was like, this huge thing, and it was on the wall and it was massive, and now it's like on Spotify and it's that big. So the value of that product has gone down, but the need for it is still there. And so you can build relationships on websites like Bandcamp and SoundCloud with musicians and artists that you like, and maybe they're a symbiotic relationship, and then you can start like creating work together, and you can start justifying why some of your prices are what they are for what they're looking for, and then just build in a way to make that work for everyone.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. The conversation in the comments section has been so interesting. I don't know if you've been following it, but it's good stuff.
Yeah, I've been like sort of following it on the side.
Peek a little bit every now and then. Yeah, I love our people there. So funny. But to try to keep it active, because we're closing in on our time. Gary says, what is the best way to figure out how to deal with all the rules and inclusions to have a license agreement with someone? Can you explain what you mean by inclusions, Gary?
Oh yeah, bye, Kate.
Bye.
Yeah. So to have a licensing agreement with someone, basically you can find licensing agreements online, and you can kind of like word them to how you would like to work. And that is, in my experience anyways, going to change over time, because stuff that I cared about 5 years ago, I don't care about now.
Sure.
So like, for example, if a dancer contacts me and she's like, okay, I would love to shoot with you. The fine print is that I would like copies of all the unedited JPEGs, because of course, they're not going to know how to deal with RAWs 9 times out of 10.
Sure.
But I would like copies of all the unedited JPEGs, because I put all the unedited stuff on my OnlyFans as like behind the scenes and sneak peeks, and then the final artwork is this. And so like, what's your price for that? And once upon a time, like I used to be like, no, you don't get copies of the unedited work, because that's, and I got over myself, because I felt like that was just like a big giant ego thing of like, oh my God, my unedited work is out there. And I was like, at the end of the day, I was like, I'm a service provider. My customer is coming to me with an ask of, okay, I want to put the behind the scenes on my OnlyFans. And I'm like, okay, cool. Well, how many people have you got on your OnlyFans? How much is that worth to you? How much are you going to make off of these images, right? And so if it's an OnlyFans page that has 25,000 people on it, that's a different price than for someone who has an OnlyFans page with 100 people or 20 people, right? And maybe that person with 20 people off of these, unedited images, those behind the scenes sneak peek stuff, whatever, is going to make, $75 off of it, or they're going to make, 150 off of it, or they're going to make 30 grand off of it.
Right.
And you have to realize that it's cumulative, but it also has to be attainable for these people. So you can't just say like, yeah, sure, my price is like $15,000 for all these unedited files, right? Okay, sure. If their OnlyFans has 75,000 people on it, they might be like, yeah, whatever, okay, fine. But they probably don't.
Right.
And so that's where you have to have the negotiation with yourself and say like, okay, what the hell am I going to do with all these unedited images? Are they going to sit on a hard drive and they're just going to be deleted?
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
then okay, well then who cares?
Yeah.
Right? Like if you are willing to do that, that also builds a good working relationship between you and your client.
Yeah.
But it also can be something for you where you're just like, I'm not really comfortable with my unedited images online. And that's also your call. And then that's also their call to hire someone else.
Right.
But that again is like the evolution of things are changing online and the market is changing. And those are decisions that you can kind of figure out if you want to make them or not.
Agreed.
Does that kind of answer the question? I don't know. Maybe I just like spiraled out there. But the reality is it's going to shift every client. And as you build these, as you get burned, basically, my favorite thing about all licensing agreements is it's basically your breakup history with other clients.
Yeah. Like I realized that the book went really, really big and I gave them an unlimited license and now I just lost potentially a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly. But also sometimes that's just going to happen.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
But again, like that's why I have, in licensing agreements, like, okay, yeah, sure. Like if you're going to do this book, how many are you estimating to sell? And then if you wind up breaching that sales point, then there's just another additional relicensing fee, et cetera, or maybe the book turns to smoke or the author doesn't do anything. There's a lot of ways to work around that. So yeah.
Sure. And there is a really simple, you can go check out Getty as well and just kind of plug in some numbers to get at least kind of a generalized idea of what average industry going rates are. And then of course you can like dial things in after that, but it at least kind of gets you started.
Yeah, Getty I find undercharges a little bit on their numbers. So what I do is I typically find a number that I'm okay with.
Right.
And then especially on the Getty site, and then I add 30%.
Yeah.
Because it's always easier to negotiate down than it is to negotiate up. And sometimes companies are just like, no, that's too high and that's it. And you're out of the conversation. And that's also the risk that you take. It's like whenever you're giving someone a quote, it's gambling.
Sure.
Sometimes the company's going to be like, oh yeah, no, that's super cheap. And you're like, I should add another 30%. Yeah. Like the worst answer I can get. And I screwed myself once super hard on a job was like, oh, that's it. And I was like,
I was like, no, I forgot.
It's supposed to be another zero on that. They're like, oh yeah, no, we thought that was a typo. And I was like, oh my God.
Yep.
Yeah, that happens. That sucks. I hate that. But, and then the other thing can happen, like I said, on the other side, where they're just like, yeah, no, that's way too much. That's like definitely out of our budget. And then you can start the negotiation of like, okay, well, what is your budget? Is this something that we can talk on or is it not? Are they just going to go to the next person? And yeah, it's gambling.
It is. And sometimes it seems like you're getting really ahead and you start to figuring out how it goes and you're like, yeah, I got this. And something comes up and you're like, I have no idea what to do.
Yeah, I don't got this.
You're like a baby all over again.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, Kelly says, you really do give the best advice, Renee. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. It's so appreciated.
Kelly. Well, thanks for checking it out, lady.
I know. And then Reality Reimagined asks, do you feel that the trajectory of the dragon fantasy genre is going to include 3D models? Like, is that where we're going?
100%. Yeah, I think so. I mean, again, there's always going to be a place for like the pure photography people, but you can do so much with 3D. Like, for example, there's like the Call of Duty, the Infinity Ward brand, basically with Call of Duty, and they can hire photographers and photograph all the things that they want, but they could also just use a 3D model and they're like, oh yeah, no, I like this 3D model a little bit. Like, let's change this one thing. You don't have to reshoot it all. That was one thing that the Battlefield did really well. They have amazing photography. So they actually did photography for Battlefield 4, I think it was. And the photography is awesome. And the costuming and the styling is super, super great. And I love it. Like it's so much fun. But they have to be so locked in. And the way that games are is that they're so fluid.
Yeah.
My understanding, I mean, I don't work in a game studio, haven't worked in a game studio, but I have a ton of friends who work in them. And, I get to hear all the stories of like, oh, well, we've changed this and we've changed this. And so, there is a limiting factor to just using photography. that 3D rendering now is getting so good, and it is actually getting photorealistic. Like they're figuring out like subsurface lighting.
Scattering.
Yeah.
Yep.
Bonkers. It's
which has been holding, that's one of the things that's held 3D animation back for so long, is that they couldn't quite get skin right, and it's now getting to the point where it's pretty insane.
Yeah. The Unreal Engine demo is bonkers.
Yes.
You want to check that out? Just like
I saw that. It's insanity. It is insanity.
I love it. I mean, but it's also like so much work, but I love it. And you know, that is in its infancy. So basically like what Unreal Engine is right now is where like Photoshop was 20 years ago. And what Unreal Engine is going to unlock 10, 15 years from now is very, very, very cool. I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, especially with the advent of VR and kind of other, you know, things like that, where now you have reactive environments and reactive lighting and just all of this kind of stuff that is just, it's insane to think about.
I love it. It's so cool. I'm so excited about it.
Yeah, it's craziness. I know during this time, that's like trying to look ahead and wonder where we're going, especially if what's happening right now becomes kind of a rolling isolation thing where we see outbreaks and then we close a little bit and then we come back out. I mean, if it really dampens the ability to go out and work with people, I feel like I'm constantly going like this. I feel really bad for people listening to my microphone.
It's like a bobblehead.
Yeah, I'm like, but I'm looking at that. I'm like, okay, do I need to maybe teach myself something like simple animation or other things where I can like take these images and actually make them more usable over wider platforms for different purposes, so that I have a little bit more value to bring to the market in the long run, because things are definitely not going to stay the same. It seems like the divergence between kind of traditional or purist, I guess, photography and digital art, it seems like that divide is getting wider. Like,
right, yeah. So it kind of went in this bubble, right? So it was always so photography and digital art were always this, right? And then compositing came along and it did this. Mm-hmm. And then it did this for a little while. And now that 3D is getting so good, it's doing this, but there's a little piece in the middle that's tangled, right? Yeah. It's kind of funny how there's like this little stream in the middle where like they still play together all the time, but it is diverging again. And it is very, very, very interesting.
Yeah, I agree, especially when you bring digital art into the realm as well, because there are some artists out there who are taking photographers' work and then doing a photorealistic painting and making small changes, and that is in their portfolio now. Yeah. And some, at least the decent ones, will credit the photographer for the original work, but a lot of times they now are heading off in these different directions with this work, and makes you wonder what that means for it. I know that that's a technique I try to use to break the boundary of disbelief when it comes to my images. The more I make them look like paintings, I feel like the more successful they are. Yep. But of course, then you lose some of that photographic, feeling to it. So it's definitely a trade-off, but it is interesting to see how those are starting to separate and how that gap is starting to widen.
Yeah. But at the same time, I'm super stoked about it.
No, it's great. Yeah, it's great. It's just really interesting and makes you wonder what the future is going to look like. I think we're definitely heading toward the anything is possible realm.
Yeah. Well, so the fun things that I think about is that, I was a teenager when Photoshop came out, essentially. Like when it became, I started on Photoshop 7 and people are like, oh yeah, CS7. I'm like, no. Photoshop 7.
Yeah.
Way before CS. CS was like, it changed the fucking world. CS was amazing. So I'm the result of teenagers who grew up using Photoshop. What are going to be the results of teenagers who grew up playing with these 3D programs that are available now? I mean, even Blender is completely free and there is so much you can do with it. Never mind like ZBrush and Maya, and like it's crazy. So what the teenagers have now and their spongy little brains and their like infinite possibilities, right? They don't have the rules that are built up in our heads that we have, right? Because we have these frameworks. I see it now in my work. 10 years ago, I didn't see the walls that I have built for myself, but now I see them and I have to actively work to break them down. These little sponge brains that are like 13, 14 years old who are seeing Unreal Engine you know, and they're just like, oh my God, that's super cool. But the context isn't there for how crazy
Right.
that is. Just like the context wasn't there for me with Photoshop 7 of how revolutionary that was compared to what was available in the 60s and the 70s.
Yeah.
So I really, really, like, I don't know if we can predict what that's going to look like in the future. I just hope that there's a future left.
Indeed.
Yeah,
Indeed.
especially like in the world of deep fakes and everything else, which
Oh, good grief.
I've been chasing that rabbit online for about 6-8 months, like with relative frequency, just kind of like keeping up with, you know, how good is the AI for detecting versus how good is the AI for deceiving. And right now it's 50-50, which means it's
Yeah. Because they're using each other to get better.
Yep.
One is using the other to teach itself how to detect, and the other's like, well, how is it detecting? Let's find a way around that.
Yeah, and as far as I understand, that technology is open source, and so you're gonna have like a kid who is growing up playing with deepfake technology. You need like a punchy computer to do it, but it's achievable, right? So you're gonna have you're gonna have a kid who's like playing around with deepfakes, and then what is the result of like that brain, that specific spongy brain of like whatever artist who's like, I'm gonna make a bunch of faces that don't exist, and then I'm gonna make all this stuff, and then like what does that like projectile look like for that singular spongy brain, and then what does that do for the culture as a whole is very interesting.
I think we definitely end up in Ready Player One territory.
Like, I'm voting Skynet.
I was gonna say Reality Reimagined was like, there's a word for that.
Yeah.
Somebody,
oh yeah, there it is.
Yep, somebody find it.
Yeah.
One, I will say, I feel like one photographer / digital artist, composite artist, and 3D, genius who's doing that really well, I think right now is Dustin Valkema. I think he's doing a really good job of kind of building and blending 3D environments with the subjects that he's photographing, particularly a lot in cosplay, and then kind of generating effects to go along with that. I feel
100%.
like striking a really good balance.
Really, really, really nice work. I love his work. But you should also check out Ash Thorpe.
Oh, I will now add that to my browser.
That dude will blow your fucking mind. Yeah, I've never had the opportunity to meet or talk to this human. I hear he's really nice. We have mutual friends, but he is so damn good. It's crazy.
I am so interested in this entire thing and where it goes and what it means and how we're gonna maneuver and what else we're gonna have to learn if we want to keep creating and earning money from it.
Have you ever gone like water skiing or something like that?
No.
Or like have you ever been like pulled behind a boat at all on anything like in the water?
I've been pulled behind vans on ice, like in rafts.
Yeah. So something like that. So I feel like it's going to be like that experience. Like you're just holding on to the back of something that's going really fast. You're getting a face full of water. And you're hoping that you can just hold on for the ride.
It does feel a little bit like that right now, for sure. And definitely, I think you're right in that probably for those of us that survive, we're going to have to find some way to outsource or build a group around what we're doing, because there's just, if you're a photographer and you're teaching yourself animation and you're teaching yourself 3D and you're trying to still market and you're trying to make product that can actually sell, there's just not enough time in the day to be that person.
Well, the reality is that those steps should have been taken 5 years ago.
Yeah.
That's the disheartening part of it, is that I've realized that if you really wanted to succeed in that, that those steps should have started 5 years ago. And so if you haven't started it yet, then like the rest of us, you're playing catch up.
Right.
Yeah.
Which hopefully, if that's the case, you have a strong enough vision, or you've put yourself in a position where you can build a community around who you are that are engaged enough that helps you make that transition, right? I mean, there are definitely people out there who their vision is stronger than their skill, and yet people still are on board for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, that also is kind of the state of being an artist, quote unquote. You could start on that ramble. I'm not going to. But as being a creative person, is that typically your flavor, your taste outweighs your skill 9 times out of 10 anyways. You're always feeling like you're behind the curve creatively.
Yeah. Well, there's always something else to learn. Like you never get to the end and be like, oh, there's nothing else now. I have reached, the nirvana of artisanship.
Yeah. Yeah, a friend of mine, I asked him advice earlier on in my career, and I have to thank him for it because it blew over my head at the time. And I said, like, which social media should I be paying attention to? I was like, I don't, this is like when I was first getting onto Facebook, and I was like, oh,
Right.
social media, like, gross. Like, I've seen what happens in the Model Mayhem forums. Facebook's just gonna be that, like, and like DeviantArt's just like tits everywhere, and
Yeah.
like coming from that world and MySpace, and just being like, oh my God, like Facebook, fine, like I'll start it off. But then there was Twitter, and then there were all these other ones that were out there at the time as well. And I was like, which one should I pay attention to? And he said, whichever one takes off for you.
Yeah.
And then at the time, my brain was just like, that is the most bullshit fucking advice I've ever been told. Like, it doesn't help. That's not helpful. It's not useful. And then here I am, like all these years later, and I'm like, that was the most honest advice he ever could have given me. Because, and it was YouTube. That was the other one. I was like, oh, should I do YouTube? Should I do this? And he was just like, whatever one takes off for you. And he's like, and so basically how I describe it now is it's like, you're just like pushing like, books on a shelf, trying to figure out which one opens up the secret door to the platform behind it.
Yeah.
And that's just time, man. And that's hard.
It is, because you do have to, and you have to at least spend a little bit of time investing in that before you discover whether or not it's the right place for you to be.
Exactly. Yeah. In all of them, you just kind of like shotgun approach. And and sometimes the approach isn't a social media answer at all. Sure. Right. And that's the other like blinders. That's the box that a lot of people have on in their head, is they're just like, oh yeah, well, it has to be social media. And I'm like, it is the exception to the rule, but there are people who do very, very well in their chosen fields and have zero social media presence whatsoever. Yeah. There's only fan pages for these people online. That's not their thing. So if social media is really, really, really not working for you, there may be other avenues that exist that you just haven't thought of yet, or you haven't realized yet. Or maybe it is that social media is the channel that you have to be paying attention to, and you just hate it.
Yeah.
So like there's no like clean answer. There's a comment there about Tim Walker, and Tim Walker also has the benefit of falling under legendary status. So he gets this like fucking hall pass because he's been amazing for like what,
forever,
years.
Yeah.
Or, like I don't even know how long he's been doing it, but he was well done. He was doing well long before social media became a thing, and he was able to hold on throughout it. So there's that,
well, and there's that people have to keep that.
And Geddes has the same like genre, like we put this like gold standard on her, even though she doesn't really photograph anymore, from my understanding of it anyways. But she was one of those artists that everyone knew about in the 90s, and has been able, she's, we say the name, and people who don't even like photography know who she is. So there is that, like, you can't really compare yourself to that generation.
Right.
You just cannot do that to yourself, because that's not fair.
No, they came up in an entirely different time where the rules of the game were very different than they are now, which is why superstar photographers were a thing. And then they have just continued to be the thing, and the rest of us are like scrabbling. Yeah,
exactly.
So
it's I don't know, people are just like, oh, what's the one answer? I'm like, there fucking isn't. There are so many
there's
answers.
not.
You just pick some of them and see what happens.
And there's also a really rough thing where an investment of effort over time is required, plus luck, plus like maintaining a skill set. And I mean, there's so many variables that it's kind of impossible to keep track of them all. So just do the ones I feel like that you can keep track of, and then do them the best that you can.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just pick your battles. There's a really good book out there called The War of Art.
Yes.
By Stephen Pressfield. So Chad Michael Ward recommended that book to me, and I was like, okay, like I love Chad's work. He's amazing. I don't know if you follow his stuff at all.
Don't, but I'm Googling.
Also very, very, very talented artist, super nice guy. And I was hanging out with him because like getting the chance to meet him. So he was one of the artists that I was looking at when I was like really first getting into this, or even before. Actually, that's not true. Back when I was modeling. So like before photography was even like a twinkle in my eye. I was seeing Chad's work online, and I was like, oh my God, this is so fucking cool. Because he was one of the few that was like smashing photography and digital art together.
Right.
And in a very, very, very cool way. And I was just like, wow. And so of course, 20 years later, we get the chance to meet, and we get along really well, so we're like friendly and stuff and whatever else. But he gave me this title of this book, and he was like, I just finished this, you need to read this. And I literally read that book cover to cover once a year, just to like keep my head in the game. Stephen Pressfield, like, I hit that book out of the park for when it comes to managing like a creative career or a creative goal, I guess.
Right.
It's excellent. I can't recommend that book enough. I wish I could write or create something that would impact people in that way. That's the
always
ego
the
talking.
goal.
The rest of me just likes making cool shit.
And that seems to be the big struggle. And I feel you there, because I find myself in that boat where there's a part of me that I desperately want to make something that matters. And then there's this other part of me, but like, this is really pretty.
Yeah.
I really like this thing. And so it seems like I only seldom do I feel like I hit both at the same time. I feel like it usually falls probably more in the pretty things. And then every now and then I feel like I made something that matters, at least on some level.
Yeah, he talks about early on in that book how he wrote a screenplay for Kong, and it was a complete flop. Yeah. And his friends were basically like, congratulations, you got your first fail. Get ready for the rest of them. And you're just like, yeah, that feels about right.
Yeah.
It's very, very true.
It is what you do. It's part of the process. And I think, I'm trying to think of who said it, but recently somebody said, do something that you'd be happy failing at.
Yeah, well, you just got to be willing to fail.
Well, and even if you just continue to fail, would you still love doing what you're doing? Like, if you can fail doing anything, if you can fail being a fast food worker, or you can fail as an entrepreneur, or whatever, and be miserable, then why not do something you'd be happy failing at, that you'd love the process, at least, even if it never got to what you imagined for yourself.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I have no intentions or goals of being remembered beyond my lifespan. I don't have that pressure on myself at all. I don't care. I mean, I'm fine if I am completely forgotten to an anonymity the day that I delete my social media accounts, and nobody wonders about it anymore. Because I think, for me anyways, to aspire for more than that is madness. Like, that's just setting myself up for doing the things that I want to do for really strange reasons that don't necessarily align with my personality.
Right.
So yeah, it's people always ask, like, oh, what would you do if you won, like, the rest of your life kind of money? Would you still be doing what you're doing? And because I always ask myself this all the time, is it's like, well, what would I do if I couldn't do this? Because knowing that I have an expiration date in my career because of the technology and the people and the kids that are coming up, once they get 15 years of experience, they're going to be unstoppable. So it's like, I try to always keep that in my mind of like, what's next? What am I going to do next? But also the question is like, if all of my bills and everything were paid for forever, would I continue doing what I'm doing? And it would be some version of this, I think, still. But maybe that'll change in 20 years, because who I am as a person is going to change. I mean, I've changed careers several times in my life, so I can't predict future me either, but I always think about it.
Yeah, I feel you.
Yeah.
And apparently as technology changes.
Exactly. Apparently Anne Geddes is active on Patreon, so
I saw that. So yeah. So have to peep that a little bit. Good for her. She definitely fell out of the, I guess, public eye, I suppose, is comparatively as to where she was when she was at kind of the height of her fame, but
still a household name, man. We know.
Right.
Yeah,
that's right. It lasted.
She changed everything. Yeah,
she did.
Yeah.
So good for her. All right, guys, we have exceeded our hour, but good conversations are fun. No, I love this. Half the point of doing this was to be able to talk to awesome people. So getting into good conversations is what makes it worthwhile. So if you guys have any more questions for Renee before we sign off, get them in quickly, get them in now so we can get to them before we go.
I see one there.
Yes. Yeah. Reality Reimagined says, if you don't care about the mark you leave behind on the industry, if you don't mind the asking, what do you want to see for yourself at the end of the road or to feel proud of?
So I ask myself that a lot. I do these like 6-month check-ins with myself of like, where are things going? How have they been? Am I okay with this? And in that case, to feel proud of, I want to look through all the photos of the behind the scenes of my life, not necessarily my career on my phone. I want to go back through my camera scroll basically and say, was that fun? Did I enjoy that? Did I do my best to do more good than harm? Because no matter what, we're going to be a villain in someone's stories. You can't fucking help that. You got to, but the question that I always ask myself is, did I aim and succeed to do more good than harm? And are there good emotions and feelings attached to that camera scroll of images? And it's not necessarily my work, because the work is its own little like planet. Every single image is like its own little experience. But just like, the pictures that you take when you're going out for a walk, the pictures that you take when you see a bunch of friends at a conference, the pictures that you take when you like wake up maybe hungover in a hotel room because you were out late all night, or like jet lagged because you've hopped a whole bunch of time zones. Does that feel, just to quote Marie Kondo, does it spark joy?
Yes.
That I think is the best way to look back on it and to see that. And if it doesn't, then it needs to change, because I know before I started this career, I look back on the photographs from that period of time and it does not spark joy. The person who I used to be before my motorcycle accident, I don't like. I really dislike that person. I dislike the life that I had at that time. It was very hard. It was very complicated. I was very unwell. I was sick. And there were a lot of things out of my control that I wanted to have in my control, but I was incapable of being able to correct those things. Right. And so I can look back on that and go like, okay, there's the baseline of the like, can't be this.
Right.
So I also have something to compare it on. And then, going through again, the more recent stuff, like it was World Goth Day or whatever, allegedly online. And so I was like, well, whatever, I'll play along. I'll put some photos up on Instagram from like the last 10 years or whatever. And I was looking through them and I was like, oh yeah, like these feel good to look at. I had a lot of fun when I had blue hair, or when I had green hair, or when I had purple hair, like, like that feels nice to look at that and go like, okay, yeah, that's the legacy. And it's only for me. It's on my device. It's on like, it doesn't have to be compared to anybody else. Like, oh, I wasn't Drake. Like, fuck, like it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just that I can look back at that and go like, yeah, no, that was, challenging and hard and exhausting, but it didn't feel like it was a waste of time.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where that line goes. So yeah, that's a really long answer. Sorry.
No, it was good. And I think that's actually super profound. I'm not going to remember who said it, but there is a quote that is, the purpose of life is to live.
Yeah.
And if you're living and loving and doing the best you can with what you have every day, then that's really all any of us can ask for, I feel like. And it's hard because there's always going to be this part of me that is, I have so many quotes floating around in my brain and never remember who said them, but something to the effect of, you should be ashamed to die before you have struck some great blow for humanity, or something like that. And obviously for somebody out there that matters, like this idea of having done a thing is really important. I think that we have lost Renee yet again. She will be back, but I will just continue that thought. So it's fantastic to see the different ways that people are able to come up with ways to find meaning, and that each of them are just as important or just as valid as the others, which is fantastic. As we get Renee back on, we'll be getting ready to sign off. So hopefully this has been a great conversation for you guys. And I think we probably won't answer any more questions since we're already about 37 minutes over time. But when you're having fantastic conversations, that makes it really, really difficult to shut off. And I never want to end just because time is over. I would rather stay and keep talking to you guys, because why not? Like, why would we stop when we're having such fantastic conversations? I feel like that is just silly. So she's reconnecting. She says she's coming in slowly, so she'll be here to sign off in a minute. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I really appreciate every time you guys come and hang out for these live stream social hour interviews. If you have anybody that you would love to see me interview, some really interesting, amazing creative person, please, put that in the comments or message me or let me know, because my calendar is really filling up fast. So far, I'm going to pull it up really quickly because so many incredible people, and I'm probably going to forget half of them, but coming up just tomorrow. So Pauline Goyard is going to be with me tomorrow. She is an incredible artist and photographer, and she's highly, highly skilled in Photoshop and image manipulation. So definitely be here for that. She's outstanding. And then after that, in June, Nino Batista will be here. Ella Grace Bell will be here. Bryce Chapman will be here. Bella Kotak is going to be here on the 12th. Jabari Jacobs, who is an incredible commercial photographer, is going to be here as well on the 16th. And Ryan Redcorn, who is doing some really amazing things with his community, the Osage people. He is going to be here on the 22nd. So a lot of really incredible people coming up. Poor Renee. Her router is killing her right now. So yeah, please be here for that. It's going to be really amazing to see and hear their stories and be able to ask those people questions. And there's so many of them who can answer for you the kinds of questions that hopefully will move you forward in your career. So, oh, we have her back.
Sorry, fuck this router, man. I'm gonna return this goddamn thing.
Yeah, go fight it. Just take the router, hit the salesperson with it. I mean, don't really do that, but.
So sorry, guys.
We hung out a little bit, so it seems like everybody is really excited about the fact that we've got to have this conversation. So Bear Photo Buffalo says, definitely learned a whole bunch of new things. So Kelly said, thank God that your computer froze when you were in an attractive pose. Because it could have been, you could have been like, for a good 5 minutes.
Oh yeah, that's what happened. That's what happened last time. We just did a recording yesterday and it froze twice like this too, and I was just like, meh.
Yep. Well, guys, I realize we just got Renee back, but we are 40 minutes over, so we're going to go ahead and sign out. Renee at the end. So I've been trying to kind of figure out how I want to structure these in a way, and thinking about things like maybe I'm going to do like ask a certain question to everybody every single time, or maybe do like a speed round where I just have a series of questions. We hit them really fast. But it seems like the one that's been really interesting is asking people if they would share their why. Why photography? Why what you're doing now? What is it that drives you and motivates you to create the things you create?
I can't draw well enough. It's faster than illustration.
Indeed it is.
Yeah, no, it's the launch pad to something else. I just don't know what yet. So it's just like a step in between to something more. People always ask me like, what are you trying to say with your images? I'm like, I just like making cool shit. That's it. Like every now and then it like hits a nerve, like the girl jumping off the building, and I'm like, yeah, right. I finally got like the one. I'm like, when's number 2 gonna happen? And so far the universe is like, it's not yet. And you're like, fuck.
Damn it.
Yeah, but I just like making interesting stuff with interesting people at the end of the day. And that's kind of it. And when that stops being fun, then I will try to chase something else. But yeah, I just enjoy it. And I mean, as far as I know, I'm stuck with this singular life in this singular meat suit. And it used to be good at a lot of stuff, but a couple accidents later, it's not so good at a lot of those things anymore.
Well, hopefully now that you're in an environment that does not have evil spores floating around in the air,
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, super glad to not be there anymore.
Yeah. Thank God,
But
because I'd be scared for you all the time. Like,
yeah,
please,
no.
no more things.
Yeah, no, it's good. But yeah, no, like, yeah, I ask myself what the why is, because that also changes every year. Some years it's like, yeah, I do this because it makes a lot of money. And then some years I'm like, it's not making any. Why am I still here? And I'm like, well, because I don't totally hate it yet.
Yeah.
But you know, any type of career like this is like a long-term relationship. You know, you're gonna fall in and out of love with it over the decades, and you have to redefine what love and commitment is to you if this is your chosen career. And
True.
so that's like an ongoing dialogue that I have with myself. So
I love that.
yeah.
I love that.
So far we're not divorced. We've taken
Right.
breaks,
Still
so.
together.
Yeah, we still
Thank
take breaks,
goodness
so.
for the rest of us, because we get to enjoy your lovely images.
Yeah, well, me and my career have definitely had like fighting matches in the kitchen before, where like someone throws a tomato and someone else smashes a dish, and you're just like, I've had it with you.
Yep.
And then you come back like a couple weeks later, and you're like, you still mad, baby?
Let's just make up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Okay, awesome. So Renee, thank you again so much for being here. I feel like we
Thanks for
had
having me.
super awesome conversations that lasted quite a long time. So
Yeah, sorry.
I love that. No, don't be sorry. There's what else is this for? You know what I mean? Are you going to show up so I can ask you 10 questions to be like, look how awesome she is. Go buy her book. And like, thanks to our sponsors. Like, no, I want it to be more than that. I want to have great conversations with great people, and hopefully edifying conversations that help people, like, you know, be more introspective or think about life in a different way, or just, you know, that's what the whole purpose is. So,
yeah.
So thank you for that.
No, thanks for having me on. It's so good, and it's good to see your shiny goddamn face. It's been forever.
Yeah, I am shiny.
I didn't mean it like that.
Well, no, but it is. I mean, this light, I have to bounce it off the wall so it doesn't just like go.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah,
So everybody who is here, thank you guys again so much for joining me. If you found this conversation interesting, if you want to see more conversations, like, subscribe. If you hit the bell, it will let you know the next time I have one, which is tomorrow, by the way. So don't forget to come be here for Pauline Goyard. She is incredible. Nice. She's going to hopefully tell us all of the cool things about, you know, photo manipulation of art pieces. So be here for that. Yeah, it's going to be great. So, we'll end the live stream and then I'll say goodbye to you. But for everybody that joined, you guys are awesome, and I'll see you tomorrow. Mwah.